At 80,000 feet and Mach 3, the SR-71 Blackbird became an untouchable phantom. No MiG-25 Foxbat ever brought it down, despite Soviet doctrine and desperate intercepts. Each scrambled pilot faced the same mathematical reality: closing speeds measured in seconds, missile energy dissipating in thin air, and engines pushed beyond design limits. How did the world's fastest interceptor lose a race it was built to win? The answer begins with the men who tried, and the physics that made their failure inevitable. Every mission began the same way. Sealed inside pressure suits, SR-71 crews watched the world shrink below as the aircraft climbed past 80,000 feet. The cockpit view was unlike anything else in aviation. Above the haze layer, the sky turned deep indigo, and the curve of the Earth was visible through the wraparound canopy. At this altitude, the Blackbird's instruments showed Mach numbers most pilots would never see. Mach 3.1, Mach 3.2, sometimes even higher. The Pratt & Whitney J58 engines, 2 per aircraft, each delivered over 32,000 pounds of thrust, their afterburners glowing white-hot as the plane accelerated beyond 2,100 miles per hour. SR-71 crews described the sensation as a controlled sprint at the edge of physics. Brian Schul, a veteran pilot, recalled reaching maximum power at a moment's notice. When ground control warned of a possible intercept, the Blackbird would simply accelerate. At cruise, the aircraft covered over 30 miles every minute. Navigation was a race against geography, not against any adversary. Missions often stretched for thousands of miles, from England to the Barents Sea or across the Sea of Japan, always at the same impossible altitude and speed. The aircraft's radar cross-section was barely a tenth of a square meter, enough to trigger Soviet radars, but never enough to hold a lock for long. Inside the cockpit, the sense of routine was absolute. 80,000 feet and Mach 3 became normal. Crews trusted the Blackbird's titanium skin to flex and seal as it heated up, and trusted the jet's design to turn velocity into safety. For the men flying these missions, the threat of interception was just another line on the checklist, acknowledged but never feared. The MiG-25 Foxbat was born from a single purpose: to catch what could not be caught. In the 1960s, Soviet air defense leaders watched American bombers and reconnaissance planes climb ever higher and faster. The answer was an interceptor that could reach the edge of space in minutes and dash past Mach 3, but only for a short time. The Foxbat entered service in 1970, its design shaped by a doctrine of brute force. Soviet planners believed that with enough speed and climb rate, even the most elusive targets could be brought down. Scramble orders went out across the Soviet air defense forces whenever radar picked up a high-altitude intruder. Pilots climbed straight to maximum altitude, relying on ground controllers to guide them into position for a single decisive shot. Western intelligence analysts, piecing together photos and intercepted chatter, saw the Foxbat as a superplane. Its massive steel frame and powerful Tumansky engines fed rumors that it could cruise at Mach 3 for hours, outclassing anything in the West. But inside Soviet squadrons, the reality was more complicated. Viktor Belenko, a MiG-25 pilot who defected to Japan in 1976, described the cockpit as a place of tension and calculation. He later told American debriefers that the Foxbat could reach extraordinary speeds, but only at the cost of engine life and fuel. The doctrine called for a zoom climb, a brief window at the edge of performance, then a quick descent before temperatures and fuel ran out. The West had overestimated the Foxbat's endurance and misunderstood its mission. The aircraft was never meant for a prolonged chase, but for a single high-speed intercept, if the timing was perfect. Belenko's defection shattered the myth and forced Western analysts to revise their estimates, exposing the limits baked into the Foxbat's design and doctrine. Radar operators along the Soviet border worked with a sense of urgency the moment an SR-71 appeared. Early warning radars picked up the Blackbird's faint signature at the edge of their range, prompting immediate action. Within seconds, alert crews scrambled to their MiG-25 aircraft. Pilots raced across the tarmac, engines already spooling. The Foxbat was built for this kind of rapid response, a 5-minute climb from brake release to the edge of the stratosphere, if everything went right. But every second mattered. The SR-71, already at cruise, was covering more than 30 miles per minute. By the time the MiG-25 rolled down the runway and lifted off, the American jet had advanced dozens of miles farther along its track. The climb profile for the Foxbat was unforgiving, full afterburner, nose pitched high, fuel burning at a rate that left no margin for error. Internal tanks limited the MiG's range to about 1,200 kilometers, but the real limit was time. A typical Intercept demanded a maximum climb, straight to over 65,000 feet, while the ground controllers vectored the pilot toward a predicted crossing point. The stress on the aircraft was matched by the stress on the pilot. At these altitudes, with throttles pushed to the stops, the Tumansky R-15 engines ran hot. Prolonged afterburner use risked overheating, and the Foxbat structure was only rated for a brief sprint at high Mach. There was no time to circle or wait for a second chance. The engagement window lasted only as long as the MiG could maintain its altitude and velocity before the fuel gauge dropped into the red. In those few minutes, the difference between success and failure was measured in seconds, and the Blackbird, still accelerating, was always just out of reach. On June 29, 1987, an SR-71 deviated from its usual high-speed corridor over the Baltic after suffering an engine failure. Swedish radar operators tracked the Blackbird as it slowed and dropped altitude, its signature still sharp and distinct at the edge of their displays. Soviet PVO controllers monitoring the same airspace scrambled MiG-25s from East German bases. The Foxbat crews climbed hard, burning through fuel, chasing a target that was now both more vulnerable and more unpredictable than usual. In the radar rooms, the tension was unmistakable. Swedish logs from that day note the MiG-25s reaching 63,000 feet, 2 miles behind the SR-71's altered course. Soviet operators issued rapid-fire vectors attempting to close the gap. One controller's frustration is preserved in a translated summary. Target is above, no closure, no lock. Continue climb. Fuel state critical. The MiG-25's radar painted the Blackbird as a fleeting echo, always slipping ahead just as the missile envelope approached. Swedish controllers, listening to the Soviet radio traffic, recorded terse exchanges, orders to maintain pursuit, warnings about fuel, then a resigned call to break off as the Foxbat's altitude and speed bled away. For those on the ground, the pattern was as familiar as it was maddening. The SR-71's emergency descent still kept it above reach. The MiG-25, leveled at 63,000 feet, never got closer than a distant radar trace. The Baltic airspace returned to routine, but the frustration lingered in the operator logs, a perfect intercept geometry undone by physics and seconds. The Blackbird had slipped away again, leaving only static and silence behind. A simple equation defined every MiG-25 intercept attempt: time equals distance divided by the difference in velocity. With the SR-71 already at Mach 3.2, about 2,100 miles per hour, and the Foxbat sprinting to Mach 2.8, the gap between them closed at nearly a mile every second. If radar showed 50 miles of separation, the intercept window lasted less than a minute. In reality, the MiG-25 spent precious seconds climbing and accelerating, while the Blackbird raced ahead, covering more than 30 miles each minute. By the time both aircraft reached engagement altitude, the Foxbat's chance to fire was measured in seconds, often fewer than 60. The geometry was unforgiving. Even with perfect vectors, the closing speed left barely enough time to achieve a lock, let alone launch. On paper, the math was clear. In the air, it was absolute. The numbers behind every failed intercept attempt were unforgiving. The MiG-25's R-40 missile, designed for high-altitude kills, burned its solid rocket motor for just 12 seconds, then coasted. At SR-71 altitudes, that brief burn lost momentum almost immediately in the thin air. The missile's closing speed looked impressive on paper, but its energy decayed so quickly that by the time it reached engagement height, it was already slowing and losing guidance accuracy. The Tumansky R-15 engines, at full afterburner, pushed the Foxbat to the edge of its envelope. At altitudes above 75,000 feet, the engines could overheat in less than 2 minutes. Pilots knew that staying at maximum power for even a moment too long risked catastrophic failure. There was no room for error, no chance to circle or try again. The hardware simply could not keep up with the physics. Every intercept ended the same way. The missile's energy was spent, the engines were running hot, and the Blackbird was already gone. Today, speed and altitude remain the ultimate shield. No operational air defense has ever downed an SR-71. As new threats emerge, technology still plays by the same laws of physics. In every era, engineering sets the limits, and those who understand them decide the outcome. Thanks for watching.